Hey, welcome back to Talkin with Tony and the Alfa. Bob Condotta has been lured into doing this. You were just walking by, and I said, "Hey, would you possibly?"
Yeah, I was begging for money on the street, and Tony said, "I'll give you $5 if you do this."
Right.
But
Here's $5 and a pair of socks. That just come on in. So, okay, a couple things. Since this is my '91 Alfa Romeo with 125,000 miles, I always ask other people, "What was your first car?"
Well, they were given to me by hand-me-downs from my dad or my grandfather, but I guess my first car was the first car that was actually mine was a car I got gifted by my grandfather, which was a '68, if I recall, kind of Buick kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like a '68 Buick that was a pretty big thing, and unfortunately it only lasted a few months because it had some engine trouble that we immediately went under, which is why I'm struggling to remember exactly what it was. But
Yeah.
I think that's what it was.
I can't imagine a '68 Buick with engine trouble, to be honest with you. But no, Buicks were big back then.
Yeah.
Believe me. I think I had my first car was a '57 Plymouth, so which they don't even make anymore. First job for you, not in writing, but just first job
Anywhere ever.
Yeah.
It was at the McDonald's on right off I-90 in Issaquah, right off kind of Lake Sammamish Boulevard, but on the other side of I-90, and I forget the name of that road there, but I should know it. But
Yeah.
way back when there was almost nothing there, and there was a McDonald's right off the freeway interchange there of I-90 as you kind of go into Issaquah, and if you turn to the left, turn depending on which way you're going. If you go one way, you go to Lake Sammamish. If you go the other way, you're going into Issaquah. But that McDonald's that was right there.
And many of the skills that you acquired at that McDonald's are evident today in some of your writing. But I'm not even sure what that means. But
yeah, I actually never rose above being fry cook. So all I did, this was the early days of McDonald's, and you did basically nothing. But I did nothing but make a million French fries and apple pies and dress up buns. So that was about it. They still made about only 5 things back then.
That's right. It was so much easier. So you right now, as the Seahawks beat writer for the Times, you have a job that, seriously, without exaggerating, probably 10 million people would love to have, not knowing the whatever downside there is, because there is to every job. Most of it's an upside. You get to cover this team every single day that you write, and I'm guessing it's still lots of fun for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, as I sort of make if you figured out by saying I graduated from Issaquah High School, I grew up in the state and went to high school in the area, and have sort of always considered Seattle kind of my home, especially from a sports standpoint. Anyway, grew up in the Tri-Cities. We would come to games, but the first Seahawks game I went to was, I think, the 3rd or 4th home game they ever had against the Dallas Cowboys in 1976. Saw Roger Staubach and that whole crew, and the Seahawks played them close for a half, and then, as happens with expansion teams, got away from them there. But yeah, so just from that standpoint, working in Seattle media was sort of all I ever wanted to do. So I've been lucky that way. I covered. I've basically been able to do a little bit of everything. I covered the Sonics for a year, covered the Mariners a little bit here and there, covered, obviously, a lot of people know University of Washington football and basketball for a really long time. But that was cool because you got to do all the Northwest kind of schools, and I really enjoyed that. And then, kind of by just kind of the way fate at our paper worked, the Seahawk job came open in the spring of 2013, right before they then won the Super Bowl, and so it was a very interesting time to get on it. So these last 5 years have obviously been a huge. I don't want to say roller coaster because it hasn't gone all the way down, but there's been a lot of dips, I guess, a lot of really interesting things that have happened. The highs and a few lows anyway.
And people will. I think that's the biggest question coming in with the new draft. Not that long ago, the OTAs, the mandatory mini camps, a little bit of a break, and then summer camp coming up. The question is, just give me a couple of, in a nutshell, sort of rapid fire impressions of the OTAs that you've seen. Players, name them if you want, the new guys, and tell me what you've seen. Capsulize it for me, if you would.
Sure. I mean, it obviously looks real different out there. As Doug Baldwin said the first day we were able to talk to him, it's a lot quieter without like Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett, and some really, the Cam Chancellor's not out there right now, may never be out there again. Earl Thomas is not out there right now because he's sort of staying away from the team due to his contractual situation. So it really does look a lot different when you see the defense, and that just really stands out. But they're going to have to start getting, hoping that a lot of the younger guys, Jaron Reed is a guy Pete Carroll has really mentioned as potentially becoming a leader on this team. Guys on the defensive line like that. Frank Clark, who's not out there right now, but they sort of anticipate Frank Clark becoming a big leader of this team down the road. Offensively, it's going to be the running backs are really going to be the interesting thing to watch. Obviously, Rashad Penny drafted him in the first round. He really looks the part out there in OTAs. OTAs are a really tough thing to judge for, as you know, running backs in line and things like that because they're not hitting. They don't have full pads on. But he really looks quick. That you see the receiving ability that they really like from him. Don't buy the hype that the Seahawks are never passing the ball ever again. All the Pete's talk about trying to get the running game back. That doesn't mean they're never going to throw it again. If you go out there and watch OTAs, the other day we were joking because it was they were doing a passing drill and they threw like 50 straight passes, and we were like, all these guys on the internet who are all up in arms that they're never going to throw the ball again would be shocked that they basically did nothing but throw it for an hour of an OTA. But you're going to see Chris Carson is back to full health, and he was really exciting to watch last year.
Yes.
And seeing him. The receivers, they just picked up Brandon Marshall, and seeing him out there the other day was really interesting. There's some of them aren't necessarily young guys that you're going to see, but Ed Dixon and Jerron Brown, you see them out there making a lot of plays early on in OTAs, and those are guys they're really going to need to step up too. And and then defense, I should mention, obviously the Griffin brothers are going to be the really fun story to watch going forward, and you see them both out there a lot. Shaquille playing corner. They're going to move him to Richard Sherman's old spot. So playing the other side of the corner, that's a hugely important position. It's sort of the widest. It tends to be the widest. Basically, it's to the right side of the quarterback,
sure.
And offensive teams tend to be a little bit more right-handed oriented if their quarterback is right-handed anyway, and. So that's going to be a huge thing for him. And then Shaquem Griffin to see where he goes. And I would temper expectations just slightly because Shaquem is lining up right now behind KJ Wright, and I don't think he's beating out KJ Wright for a starting linebacker job anytime soon.
Not now, anyway.
Not right now, but they'll find ways to get him on the field in special teams and some things like that.
Do me a favor. Hang on, hold that mic there.
Sure.
I'm going to hold something up here, Bob. Speaking of Sherm, I remember when Richard Sherm, these shirts, by the way, which used to be like $30 at local stores, are now $5 at Albertsons in Renton. They can't get rid of them. But we all love Richard. I'm speaking for everybody. I love Richard. You do. He went to another team. We all know that. He's not a Seahawk anymore, but he will always be a favorite, I think, in this community. But let me point one thing out, and you remember this. There was a time when Marcus Trufant was the starter, Walter Thurman was number 2, and who has to come on the field because they both got hurt? Richard Sherman. Nobody knew about him except the scouting staff. And the rest is history. The guy is one of the all-time greats, I think. So that could happen with anybody.
Sure, and revisionist history. I mean, a lot of history sort of gets revised as it goes on. You talk to people who were there at the time; they really had no idea when they drafted Richard Sherman in the 5th round. It was just a flyer. It was a 5th-round guy that had measurables. Pete had played against him. Obviously at Stanford when he'd been at USC. But I think if Pete Carroll and John were completely honest to you, they'd be like, "We never knew he was going to become exactly what he became." Once they got him, and I've even talked to people at Stanford because Richard didn't really light it up at Stanford. It wasn't like he was all Pac-10 3 straight years or something like that. Some people so you're right, and that's what they are going to bank on, and that's where guys like Trey Flowers, the guy who sort of was almost the exact same size as Richard was coming out, and they're going to try to make him a corner, drafted in the 5th round, almost the same spot where Richard was. So see if he can become a corner. So you're right, they are going to bank on guys like that a lot. The Delano Hill and Tedrick Thompson, young safeties like that. They re-signed Bradley McDougald. He's not necessarily a young guy, but that is what they're going to hope. And I do know that I think Pete is excited about the challenge of doing that. It's sort of like they built it once. They're not completely rebuilding because you still have Russell and Doug and Bobby Wagner and KJ and some really key guys like that. But figuring out, can I take another group of young players and mold them the way we did Richard and Cam and these guys a few years ago when they were coming up? Yeah. I do think he's excited by that.
And that energizes Pete. It always has from the time he was a coach at UFC. Before that in the NFL, that's always energized him to get young guys to play. And it's all about a little bit about luck. It's a little bit about who you play. Same with the Mariners. No matter what team we're talking about. Who knows? And I love the speculation that goes on every day on talk radio because it really is all guessing, and we don't know if they're going to be 8-8 or 12-4 or what, but that's part of the fun, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. And and they kind of the theme has been over there that this is sort of how they feel like they were maybe in 2011. Yep. when they were kind of putting it together, in 2012, where maybe you forget, but they started out 6-5 and sort of looked like they were dead in the water, and then it all just kind of clicked. Russell became, almost unstoppable offensively. The defense really found, kind of took another step, and from the middle of from late in the 2012 season through last year, really they've been, had as good of a win-loss record as anybody in the NFL.
Sure.
And so they're sort of hoping they can, that's why they kind of say retool instead of rebuild, because you still have some really significant players there to kind of try to put this all around. But yeah, every team is different. Every season is different, and who knows what's that. It's going to be a challenge. I mean, the NFC West is better with
much better.
The Rams have done. The 49ers obviously are taking a real run for it with Garoppolo and getting guys like Richard. They made some other aggressive moves to try to piece it together there. And then, even Arizona, the Seahawks the Seahawks never play an easy game with the Arizona Cardinals. So
no, not true. No, you're right.
It's going to be a challenge, but I do think that this is still a team that I think can be competitive every single Sunday, which as a fan is mostly what you should. You'd love to win the Super Bowl every year, but if nothing else, you at least want to be entertained and intrigued every Sunday. And this team should be able to do that.
And no, I agree. One thing, and I see if you agree with me on this, as we close out with Bob Condotta, Times beat writer for the Seahawks. It's different than it was when you first started out. You didn't have Twitter. You didn't have all of the other pundits out there. You didn't have all the writers, all the bloggers, and most of them are not professional, but they're trying, and some are pretty good. And so speculation goes in big waves from left to right, back and forth, and it didn't before. So, for example, Mariners win 4 in a row. Suddenly they're going to win the division. Then they lose 2 in a row. Everybody's crushed again. Do you see that wave happening? And you have to kind of buck that trend. You got to stay with the facts, right?
You try, yeah. And obviously the NFL is a little bit different because every week, you only play 16 games, so they are all a big deal.
Yeah.
But you're right about the off season. The NFL has done an amazing job of making their league a league where there's always just enough happening between free agency and the draft and the combine and OTAs and minicamp and all these little things they have where things always maybe are just going on enough that it lends itself to sort of constant analysis and what's going on and things like that. But you're right, you do always have to temper that guys say things in May or things happen in May, and by the time August or September rolls around, things could look a lot different, and you can start off 0-2 and still get to the Super Bowl as teams have done before. So you do always have to sort of realize that. You do try a little bit, I guess, in my specific role, because I'm not really a columnist or whatever, to, you maybe just kind of point out at times that, hey, maybe not everything's as good as it looks, but maybe not everything's as bad as it looks or whatever.
No, that's good. And you know what? I followed you through the draft and since then in the Times, because I'm still a Times guy. I'm still a newspaper guy. I see some of the stuff online, but I actually have it in my driveway in the morning.
So you're one of the...
Yeah, I'm one of... one of the few, and I always get a kick out of the guy. The guy apparently doesn't have much of an arm. The guy delivers my paper because it's always right at the bottom. I don't care. It's a good walk. But anyway, Bob, thank you for keeping us informed and entertained, and have a great season. We'll catch up with you again. And by the way, this is an international program, this Talking with Tony and the Alfa. I've got viewers as far away as, Puyallup, for example. I really do.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe we can get all the way to the 360 somehow. Or
well, I don't know.
But
we're dreaming now.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Sure, anytime.
See you next time on Talking with Tony and the Alfa.